Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Modern Sales Pros Masterclass on 7 tips for hitting your numbers, sponsored by the team at Concert. We're joined by MSP Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion Committee member and CEO and co-founder of Concert Finance, Sanj. Sanj, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Welcome.
Thanks.
And as folks are getting settled right now, we're going to pop a poll up here. So go ahead and take a second and fill that out. But Sanj, as people are getting in and tuning in, love to learn a little bit more about you. We've asked you where you're excited to travel. We asked you what hobbies you picked up. So I'm going to throw a new question your way. What's the most recent book that you're working your way through? Or what's the most recent book that you finished that you would recommend to our audience?
So I'm most of the way through Anthony Bourdain's World Travel, which is awesome because it reminds you of all of the great places that we can one day see again in the world. And, you know, Anthony Bourdain is like a super interesting person and has a great point of view on the world.
That's the new one, right?
Yes, it is. It's
the
posthumous release of a conversation he had with, like, just on the concept of the book.
But, I'll have to check that out. Sounds exciting. What
not like Amazing Tips in Miami. Just sorry, Rich.
Yeah, no,
no, I'm
fine.
kidding.
No,
there actually are some good ones.
Yeah, probably. So I don't just go to the Salt Bay place. I have to actually go to other restaurants down here.
Yeah, Margaritaville.
Obviously, Senor Frogs. All right, before we get into too much trouble here, we got a lot to get through today, Sanj. So let's jump into it. As I had said at the beginning, today's session is hosted by the team at Modern Sales. So for those of you who don't know, and Sanj, please advance one slide. For those of you who maybe don't know or aren't familiar, or this is your first time joining us, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders. Those are folks that are in sales and revenue operations, sales leadership positions, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission is to create an environment for our community members where they can answer questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own and see around corners that they might not be aware of. We do that through bringing on great speakers like Sanj, through our very active online forum, and hopefully in the very near future, we'll get back to in-person events where you have an opportunity to meet some new folks and have a good time. Everything we do for our members is free, and for those of you who are joining that maybe aren't members, you'll be invited to join afterwards. And if you enjoyed today's session, Sanj, please advance. You can join us actually next week on our Revenue Excellence Summit, focused on all things customer. Instead of building your entire business go-to-market function out, you want to start to think customer in. It's our cheeky, clickbaity title. The funnel is dead. We're going to be talking about all kinds of things to help you transition your organization again from function out to customer in. If you enjoy today, please do join us next week. But as I said at the beginning, Sanj, you've been here, you've joined us so many times. It's always a wonderful conversation with you. But for those of you maybe who haven't had a chance to meet Sanj, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sanj, co-founder and CEO here at Concert. Before starting Concert, I was a former CFO and head of finance and managed sales comp, everyone's favorite topic. At Concert, we automate the calculation of sales comp, but one of the things that we do that's a little bit different is we actually help you create better comp plans through an understanding of the neuroscience and psychology behind comp. And we're going to give you some of those tidbits today.
And folks, before Sanj runs through the agenda here, these typically are meant to make you think and challenge you a little bit. If you have questions, please do use the Q&A panel as well. That'll give us a chance to load balance this, but these conversations are always great. If you haven't had a chance to see Sanj Bees, we're in for something pretty special here.
Yeah, and the goal is that these things are like actually tactical, usable. You can start implementing them now, and we hopefully will share some of the science around why they work and how you can drive better performance. So today we're going to go through the first part of what we talk about is our commission smarter feedback loop. So how do targets, comp, training, how do they all fit together to influence your performance? Then we're going to go into our 7 tips. We have them broken out into 2 sections. Like one will be really around the tactics, like, what are specific elements you can put into your comp plan today to get them to perform better. The second is going to be around the culture you're creating in how you're managing quotas and performance. And then finally, we'll share some tips on how you can move forward. If I can learn to click. And also, like, before we get too far into this, if anyone is a seller at Margaritaville, like, I'm a huge fan. I'm not trying to rip it apart. It's just not the best restaurant in Miami. So starting into the Commission Smarter feedback loop, if any of you have joined concert topics before, this is really the science of how comp plans impact performance. Wow, okay, we got some polling results right now.
There's a lot of confident people here.
Yeah, that's great.
That's awesome. Congratulations to the 45% of you.
Yeah, so for the 45% of you, we'll give you a few tips on how you can become more confident. For the other 54 or 55% of you, we will hopefully make you a little bit more confident. So how does comp really work? How do targets work? How does your playbooks work? How do commissions influence performance? So the science of this is they actually activate reward-based learning feedback loops in your brain. And the way a reward-based learning feedback loop works is first you have a target. It kind of tells someone where you're supposed to go. Like, what are you aiming for? The second element is the playbook or the behavior that you're looking for. So, okay, I want to go to $100,000 by the end of the quarter. How do I get there? Do I actually know what I need to do to get to that number? And the final is the commission or the reward. And that piece is what kind of solidifies that learning. So it reinforces the behavior, so that starts to become habit. And you start getting to your targets more regularly. This is really foundational in how we're going to talk about the tactics. So, I'll kind of pause here and see if there are any questions. If not, I can move forward.
First question, just the target, the quota, the plan, and the goal. What would you say kind of the differences would be in those things?
Yeah, so kind of a target, a quota, and a plan and a goal are often used synonymously. So totally understand the confusion there. When we say the quota, this is really like, what does an individual rep think that they're supposed to hit to make their OTE? That can be disconnected from your sales plan, which is fine. It can be different from the individual targets that you set for them. But really, this is the number that someone thinks about as success.
Great question. And folks, keep them coming. We're gonna, as we move into this, do stop, ask questions throughout.
Cool. So we're diving in to the 7 tips for hitting quota. If you guys take these tips, you too can look this joyful. So we're splitting them up again into tactics and cultural elements. So on the tactics side, hitting mid-year, if you are at mid-year, or if you've started a new fiscal year, this is really the time to reset your quotas, reset how you're thinking about them, incorporate all the learning that you had from the market. And it's totally reasonable time to do that. The second tactic is to set multiple tiers. We see a lot of plans where people are putting in, 0 to quota gets paid X rate, and then over quota gets paid a higher rate. You can actually put a little bit more granularity into that, and we'll talk about why that makes sense. Tactic 3 is switching to monthly quotas. This is probably the one where people start vomiting all over it. Hold your questions till we get there. But there are a lot of reasons and a lot of data that we've seen why that's effective. The fourth is thinking back to that feedback loop around building habits. So if you think about your comp program as helping your sales team build a habit, what are the habits you're really trying to build? On the culture side, overall, kind of all the research that you will see around how people do their best work suggests that compassion is more valuable to people's performance than any form of competition. So with that, everything you're going to see here is like, don't over reward these top performers. Don't kind of create these artificial competitions in the organization. And in fact, like, encourage kind of those self-care moments. And again, more research behind this, like anyone who knows me kind of pre-concert would know that I would have been the one vomiting all over these things. But there is actually a reason why they work, and we've seen through data that it actually increases performance. All right, so let's dive into the tactics. Rich, for the 19th time, do you remember what the most common marathon finish time is?
3 hours, 59 minutes.
Very good. So if you guys haven't seen this stat before, the most common marathon finish time is 3:59, which is shocking and makes me feel like very bad about my athletic performance. However, what's more impressive than that is the fact that the graph is so multimodal. As you reach these milestone times, you see peaks and troughs right around the milestone. And that gives you insight into one key characteristic of every human that you're working with, is that we're driven to achieve targets. So when we go into recommendation 1 of resetting your quotas, what we're really talking about is leaving the past in the past. So if you can, this is a great time to just say, like, whatever you overachieved or underachieved in the first half of the year, let it go. You're starting new. The reason it really shows up in this graph at this point here, at 4 hours and 1 minute, the difference between 3:59 and 4:01 is a 40% drop off in performance. So basically, if you're not going to hit your target, you just stop trying. So in order to really activate this, think about what your targets really are. They need to be relevant and controllable. You can't control what's already happened. And for the relevance piece, we really see this on CS teams who might have annual targets where they're maybe comped on a retention rate for the full year. The people who have renewed have either renewed or terminated, right? Or the renewable amount. They've either renewed or terminated already. What do you want someone to do with the very next customer who's supposed to renew? You want them to still go for the renewal regardless of where they are on their retention rate. That's how you like increase the relevance of the targets you're setting.
Sanj, this idea of resetting quotas, is this something that is different depending on maybe the sales cycle of an organization? Or is this something where half year is always just a good time to take a look at the quotas and say, now's the time?
Half year is usually a good time, mainly because you have 6 months of data to see how people are working through their pipeline, like what's working, what's not out of the initiatives that you plan for. Are you generating the number of leads that you thought you would be able to generate from the investments you made at the top of the funnel, which is soon dying? So it's sort of an artificial time, but about 6 months in, it usually gives you enough data to know if it's the right move or not.
Makes sense. One live question coming in here, Sanj, about renewals versus retention. Can you dive into the specifics of what that would actually look like? Will, great question here. Will's question is just on renewals versus retention. What does the comp plan look like? What would we be paying out on? Would it be dollars renewed? Would there be a cliff? Would every dollar count? Just talk us through maybe one level deeper on that.
Yeah, so if you're really trying to focus people on kind of the, what's relevant and controllable, every single renewal that they have an opportunity to execute on is relevant and controllable. So our recommendation is you pay people on every single dollar booked and you calibrate it against their base target, their base target. If you want to be extra generous, so say Rich has $1 million book of business, maybe over $750,000 in renewals, he can get a higher rate. And what you can also add to that is the idea that accounts might be reassigned. So like an added bonus that you get from paying on renewal dollars, which has nothing to do with this slide necessarily, is that people are eager to take on more accounts. So you increase your service efficiency as well.
Clever. Good, great question. Well, thank you.
All right, moving on to tip 2. So tip 2, set multiple tiers. Again, we see plans all the time that are like up to quota, you get paid this rate, over quota, you get paid this higher rate. But the way that this ties back to the graph before it is not everyone is made to run a 4-hour marathon. I mean, I certainly wasn't. So when I ran, my embarrassing marathon finish time is 5 hours and 28 minutes. It's because this lady was running in front of me with a 5:30 sign. And like for 26.2 miles, I just kept her in my sights. And I was like, I'm not losing to her. I can definitely do this. And when you get to the last 2 miles, you're just like, okay, I know what I have, what I need in the tank. I can do this. And, I beat her by 2 minutes. So like, I guess it worked. No, it was like still not a very good time. But the point of the multiple tiers is that 1 4-hour number isn't enough to bring out the best performance in everyone on your team. And by setting multiple tiers, what you're able to do is get your high, medium, and low performers each to have their own target that they find more relevant.
That's interesting too, because I've seen this before where maybe you get paid like 10% on the deals up until quota, and then after that you start to accelerate. But you're saying there's actually some benefit here of having maybe lower tiers. Like how would that work?
Yeah, so you might have lower tiers that have a decelerator to them. So you might say like, up to 50% of quota, you're actually paid 8%. And then you're paid 9% from 50 to 100, and then you're paid 10% over 100. The calibration of those tiers is just math. That's like actually like the easy kind of dumb routine part of getting this done. The principle around how you're setting these targets so that every person is able to look at a target and kind of say like, okay, that's the one for me. And that every person is able to look at their pipeline based on their target and act differently.
Right.
That's like when you're really kind of hitting a magical spot with these.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, the other cool thing about this is from our data, we've seen that people so say you get to tier 2 this quarter, people who are at tier 2 are much more likely to get to tier 3. Like, so it builds like a natural progression of performance for your team.
Interesting. It's almost like you can think of these as your tranches, right? If you wanted to run a 3:30 marathon, you probably wouldn't start shooting at 3:30. It'd probably be 5:15 and then 5 and then 4 and change or whatever it might be.
Right. You kind of chip away at that goal. And it's like much less daunting than just kind of being thrown into it.
No, that makes, again, as usual with these things, the psychology of it really resonates in like normal stuff that we humans generally understand.
All right. So the one to vomit over, Rich, I can tell you're already like freaking out. You're like, no way.
I'm just excited about a vacation 6 months from now.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to do a psychology experiment to understand like how temporal distance impacts our perception. So imagine a vacation you want to take 6 months from now. Rich, I'm putting you on the spot. What do you want to do 6 months from now?
I want to be somewhere tropical and with a tropical drink in my hand.
All right. So zoom it in. If you're taking a vacation 2 weeks from now, what do you want that to be like?
I definitely want to know a little bit more about where I'm going when I get there, what the stuff I'm going to do when I arrive at the destination is going to be, how I'm getting back and forth to the airport, what the weather's like.
Yeah. So you're thinking about tactics, like people start thinking about what they're going to pack.
Yeah.
They think about where they want to eat, what spa appointments they need to book. Like they're they zoom down from like this feeling to this actual action that they need to take. And that's the same thing with monthly versus annual quotas. With shorter time horizons, you translate goals to action. And we've seen this in our data when people are moving from annual or quarterly targets to monthly targets. Like, believe it or not, we actually convince people to do this. But you see more active pipeline management. So instead of seeing everything parked with a September 30th close date, you start seeing things are going to close August 15th. What? We can close things August 15th? Like, who knew that? You see people close fewer months with zero, especially if you have a team that's used to longer sales cycle. It's probably not a big deal for someone to close a month with zero. You see less concentration of the closed dollars in the last period of the month. I'm not saying this is going to bring you to 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, but instead of 80% of your business being closed in the last month, maybe you'll move to 50% closed in the last month. And then finally, you see higher overall performance. So we've seen from some of our customers, 10 to 15% increases by this change.
So Sanjay, I want you to unpack that a little bit more. Quicker sales cycles, this makes a ton of sense. But if you've got a longer sales cycle, let's call it 4 months or above, 5 months or above, something like that, how does this work, practically speaking?
Yeah, so for the longer size sales cycle, probably the biggest thing that this does is it helps people to stop thinking through the kind of quarter end madness, right? Like, I think there's a natural inclination to like work with the prospect and say, let's get this done by June 30th. And when you're on monthly quotas, then suddenly it kind of doesn't matter. Like, if you have a few big deals, like, you're just going to try to make sure they all close around the same time. But you're no longer confined to thinking this needs to close by June 30th. You might actually say this needs to close by May 31st. The other thing that you'll see, and I think this, again, we have like a handful of customers who've taken this suggestion on that we've seen the performance of, but I think there are things that you can see around discounting as well. Like, I think it's pretty well known that near quarter end, you're going to be able to work your way into a discount. If suddenly you're closing this like off that cycle, the discounting incentive kind of goes away.
No, it's interesting too, and you can probably it probably puts you in the mindset a little bit more of when your customers going to be ready to do it, right? It's not like, what do I got to do to get you into this, SaaS platform today?
Right.
It's no, okay, Sanj, you're ready to buy. I've got other stuff I can focus on for, June close or July close or whatever it is.
Right. Cool. So, step 4, building the right sales habits. So we're back to the Commission Smarter feedback loop, where we're thinking about our quotas, the behaviors of how we're going to get to quota, and the reward that kind of builds that into habit. So what we're really looking for when we're talking about building sales habits is like, how do we successfully execute this feedback loop as many times as possible? Because the more you give a reward for the right behavior, the more you're building a habit. So, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, this is what I was going to give everybody a teaser, but you already showed the slide. No, what this is, it's funny. You talk to sellers and you talk to sales leaders about this concept, and sometimes they kind of hand wave at it, but this is tactical, actionable goodness right here.
Yeah, so I think from really like a finance or an ops lens, you sort of naturally think about the pipeline this way. Like, you're thinking about it as like a factory and supply chain, and you kind of work backwards. So like, to get to 100 closed won opportunities, I might actually need to start with 110 MQLs and 107 outbound ops generated. So most reps at the individual level don't really think about hitting quota this way. And what we propose, and this is called, we call this a blueprint to quota, is how are you going to hit your target? So if you have a quota that goes from September to November and you need to close 20 ops in that time, like let's choose ops instead of dollars for simplicity, then what you actually need to do is, and what you might notice is that your work actually starts in August, and you actually need to do outbound from August to October to have a chance of getting here. So are you taking the right steps at the right time to hit your quota? And what you can do, the way it ties back to comp, is you actually pay for these intermediate steps and these intermediate milestones because you're really trying to build the habit around that.
No, and I think you can see this too organizationally, and I think we've all been a part of this in the past, where maybe you're bringing in a bunch, you get a big deal, right? It's a standard deviation or two above whatever else you got going on. You look at that and you go, oh man, okay, cool. I'm only going to focus on that, and then you forget all of these other things, and you don't really have a good quarter the next quarter, or a good month the next month. So, yeah,
right. Yeah, and Jonathan Morris, we're not trying to like pretend that someone has like an amazing sales cycle. No. Cool.
there we go.
All right. So now we're moving out of the tactics, and now we're thinking about your team as people. And the first thing that we often see, and if anyone approaches me with this comp plan, it's like the first thing I try to work with them to pull out: accelerator rates that are too rich. This to me like just sticks out in every person who has it as just like a total lack of strategy, right? Like, okay, you know what? If someone beats quota, or if someone gets to 2x a quota, let's just pay them 45%. And it's like, okay, cool. How are you supposed to get there? Like what that rich accelerator rate really shows is like, it's a lottery ticket. Like it's really disconnected from like anything you can actually do as a rep. We recommend that you limit your accelerators to 2x the base rate. There are cases where you can go a little bit higher than that. But really, high accelerators lack the target that really motivates someone, because 2x quota for most people is not motivating. It actually is an impossibility.
Right.
And it doesn't give them the right behavior. So what is it that I'm supposed to do to get to 200% of quota? The last point on this is that excessive rewards increase your willingness to take on risk. So if you look in the back, there's a picture of a lottery ticket. Rich, do you ever play the lottery?
I've played before, yes.
When do you play?
Usually when the jackpot's like gigantic.
Right. So, you know, my number is 300 million. If the jackpot's over 300 million, I will buy 3 tickets. One will have the lost numbers, and then like the rest will be random. I'm like revealing a lot about myself here. So I'm not a risk-taking person necessarily. Like I can take calculated risks, but like I'm a finance person. I don't do that stuff. But a really high reward changes your risk tolerance. It changes your psychological calculation on whether the risk is worth taking. Anecdotally, in our data, we've seen that this seems to result in lower quality deals. So the deals that get you to that accelerator and happen after that accelerator tend to be higher risk than the deals that you did to like kind of in ordinary business. We also see this to a lesser extent for like the push at the end of quarter. So when that rep is just closing like 6 deals, all in the last 2 days. And kind of, you know who that rep is. But those tend to be the moments where you're pushing kind of extra risk, right? Like you're willing to take on more risk. And the risk isn't bad, right? Like running a business requires risk. It's just, is it a risk you're willing to take, or is it a risk someone took because the reward was so high?
Sanj, it's probably worth it to unpack that a little bit. We have a few questions here about, like, when you say low quality, what would that look like or feel like? And I certainly have some ideas, but I'd love your perspective.
Yeah, so I define low quality as kind of either taking abnormal contractual terms. So like, okay, we're going to let you take term for convenience when we don't normally do that. The other one is they seem to be more likely to churn well in advance of the normal kind of renewal cycle. So we've seen examples where from customer data where like they typically have renewals for 3 or 4 years, but the deals that kind of pushed into this rate all terminate after the first year.
And I think another thing to look at there, going into the terms, looking at those deals, and if you're running a complex sales process, these are the ones that are probably like not quite using it the way that it's supposed to be, or maybe it's in my past life, it would be a vertical where we really had never had success and had a lot of failure. There's probably some other more macro business things that you could look at there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can create more rules around how people get there, but part of why people are pushing for these deals is that accelerator. And in all of this, please know I've made literally every one of these mistakes myself. But I remember I worked for an email marketing company earlier in my career, and we set one of these really rich accelerators, and then we had a rep who sold a $100,000 deal to a company that sent no consumer email. And like, people kind of laugh at that and they're like, oh, ha, 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 what a great sales rep. But like, actually, what a horrible customer experience. And like,
Right.
you only, like, who knows why that customer actually like bought. But like, it's still like such a terrible experience. It makes us look like we don't know what we're going to do. And the only way that I knew about it to like terminate that contract immediately and refund the customer right away is because the account director said, hey, this one's definitely going to churn because they don't send email. Can I make sure it doesn't hurt me next year?
That seems like a really good way to make sure that it's identify low quality, like they're not using your product or in a
correct.
space they don't want to use it.
All right, so we can go back. We have another one.
Yeah, the question is like, shouldn't it be someone's job to prevent that? The deal desk or the VP. Like, I mean, Sanj, I'd love your perspective on like where bad deal prevention lies.
I mean, I would say like it ultimately falls on the rep, right? Like this person spent time on closing this deal that is totally worthless. And at some level, they must have known is totally worthless to the company as well. Like, yes, could Deal Desk have caught it? Potentially. It depends on what Deal Desk is reviewing. If they're actually reviewing the contract wouldn't indicate that the customer didn't have a need for the services. Like it didn't kind of do the N in band, right? Like that's not what they're checking.
I think with this too, it depends a lot organizationally. When in a past life, whenever we had a deal that we would describe as a fishbone, that's how we knew it was just kind of going to be a bad fit. We would sit down and we would have a fishbone review meeting, and it was the organization's decision to take a fishbone. It was never like we took that out of the reps' hands because, well, I think Sanj is really well intentioned. Reps, they're like water. They're gonna flow to the point that gets the deal done. And if you don't put the guardrails around them, you can end up with silly behaviors. So we would have a fishbone review, and at the end of it, if we decided we were taking a deal, we would take the deal.
Right. Like you kind of knew what you were getting into. You probably pre-cleared it with the CS team saying like, don't worry, this one's not going to hurt you for churn. Like, don't worry, we know this customer doesn't send email. So yeah, I think there are a few ways to stop it, but like ultimately I would push this back to like your rep is spending time on this instead of a real deal that's actually worth money. So like as much as you can, like you want to put that filter in the front where the rep doesn't even go for that kind of bad deal. And these rich accelerators do push people to that. They see a quick path to close for a customer who like maybe doesn't know enough about the problem to properly assess whether it's a good fit or not.
Great conversation here. I love the commentary. Another point on this, Sanj, too, is just how, we're talking about the AE perspective of the rep. We've talked a little bit about customer success. How much of this pulls through to the folks that are kind of in the front end, your BDRs or your SDRs, the opportunity and meeting setters? Do these still hold true?
Yeah, these absolutely do. So like same thing if you're talking about BDRs and SDRs, like if you give too rich of a meeting incentive, you're going to get lower quality meetings. If you are paying on accounts, kind of accounts touched or like volume of prospecting that goes out, like your prospecting starts more closely resembling spam.
Yeah, I think the analogy here, I think, is also like Goldilocks, right? There's like a right place to set this where it drives the right behavior, but also isn't going to result in me as a seller having a meeting with somebody that can't use my technology.
Right. And I will also say that like most people show up at work trying to do a good job. They're not trying to screw you over. They're not trying to take all of your money. Like they want to do a good job and hit their targets the way that they're supposed to.
Right.
But like sometimes we introduce these things that kind of change the evaluation criteria in our brains.
Yeah, we should probably keep moving here. Keep the questions coming, folks, but we got a few more points to get off of here.
All right, so step 6, Olympic theme, turn off the leaderboard. This is probably one of the more controversial things that we tend to recommend to people. But a 3-year study looked at the performance of 1,700 reps. This study was done from the University of Pennsylvania. And it found that over those 3 years, if you turned off the leaderboard, reps did 11% better on average. And this applied evenly to top kind of core performers and low performers. So like everyone across the board does better when you don't show the leaderboard. And the reason why we're showing Simone Biles' vault score here is because if you look at vault 1, she was like way beyond her competitors to begin with. So you don't, if you're that kind of high of a performer, you don't really pay attention to the rest of the board. You're like beating yourself. Vault 2 is better than Vault 1, not because she thought she wasn't going to win the gold. And I mean, Simone Biles is like kind of the best case study for like why your top performers shouldn't be like moved by the leaderboard. Going into the Tokyo Olympics, the starting value of the skills she's executing, she could fall on every single discipline and still win the gold. So that's not why top performers perform. And if anything, it actually just harms everyone lower in the stack because they're like, why even try?
It's really interesting. I also think with this too, leaderboards, like as we move more fully remote, I feel like it's an office thing in a lot of ways. You get big TVs and tunes blaring and all of that. So this is a timely point for sure.
Yeah, and I think it assumes that kind of sales personalities are similar and ignores that like everyone on your team is still an individual and like they may or may not like having, a song blaring or, that may or may not be motivating to them. So this really kind of speaks to like, it does more harm than good in most cases. people really struggle with this. Like, so, every time we talk about turning off a leaderboard, like someone will say, well, I know, like for my team, this, and this happened because of our leaderboard. And that anecdote is really strong, but you don't have 1,700 reps and 3 years of data. You have one story that seemed to work for one quarter and ignored everyone else who it didn't work for.
The other question on this too, and this is the live question, same thing that I had too. Like, how do you share the results though, right? Like, how do you let folks know what other people are up to? Or is this, I don't know enough about the study to answer this, Sanj.
Yeah, so you can share the results. Probably the most effective way that the study recommends sharing the results is in aggregate. So if you say like Rich is at 98% of his annual target, today on July 6th, and the team of Sanj and Rich are 50% towards our target. What that seems to do is you would be like, well, I'm at my target, but let me try to help the team along a little bit. And if I'm seeing that I'm at 30% and that the team is at 50%, I'm like, I'm really not pulling my weight. Let me figure out what I can do differently to help the team out. So again, it's like approaching things collaboratively and compassionately, not competitively.
Right. Okay. That doesn't feel right. It's one of those ones where it's going to take I feel like I'm putting my watch on the wrong hand. That feels a little bit different.
It is really different. And the other thing I would say you can do that is like not posting kind of a leaderboard is like if you're sending out emails or Slacks, like whenever a deal closes, like people figure out how people are doing overall. Or you can even celebrate them like verbally at the end of a period, not necessarily having it like in someone's face all day, every day.
Interesting. I'm gonna have to check that study out. That sounds pretty sweet.
Does it, or does it sound like deeply uncomfortable?
We're here to learn, right? That's what we love. We love having Sanj on because he's gonna challenge us to think a little bit differently.
Okay, are we still on leaderboards or should we move on?
We can go forward. There's a couple of questions, but we can take them.
Okay.
I want to make sure we get through these points here.
Okay, so the last tip is encouraging meditation. So certain meditation techniques, less so on just like breathing, but more visualization exercises can help close your distance towards any goal. The reason goal visualization in particular is so valuable to people is it helps your brain kind of slow down a little bit and build the connections between your target and the actions you need to take to get to target. So subconsciously, while you're trying to clear your brain out, while you're focused on your breath, while you're thinking about your goal, your brain is building the connections behind it to figure out how you're actually going to get there. And the real kind of interesting thing about meditation is there are a bunch of MRI scans that are done on monks who meditate a lot versus an average person. And what they show is that monks are able to activate kind of the stressed response of their brain in a controlled way, and kind of the introspective part of their brain at the same time. So for normal humans, this is called fight or flight, where we can actually like kind of impact one stress response and that's it. We are just like a seesaw between the two. But monks are able to lift both sides of the seesaw at the same time. So they can activate both parts of their brain. And what that really means is they're able to be highly responsive, but also very measured in their response. And that is like a unique skill that would benefit like really any seller. But kind of to the tactical side of it, people who meditate feel like their goals are 30% easier, whether or not they actually are. And you've seen that while they're working hard, it feels easier. They're able to move through faster. It's probably like one of these squishier things that I've learned along the way, but also probably one of the most kind of easy to roll out, impactful things, like interesting to share with your team. Costs no money.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious about this. Sounds squishy to your point. How would you, let's take this one level deeper tactically. How would you encourage the team to start to meditate? But how have you seen this actually rolled out to organizations?
Yeah, there are a variety of issues in like forcing it. So you cannot force anyone to meditate. But I think
you put a meeting on the calendar and it's, we're going to meditate for these 15 minutes and you're going to like it.
Well, you can say this is blocked off on everyone's calendar.
Yeah.
To take this time, and take the time any way you want to. A lot of this is really hard to kind of get started, but the more you do it, the more you fall into the habit of it. And you can like work with your team to kind of gamify it or create more habits around like actually meditating.
All the things I think I knew this point was coming, but still the last two feel the most like I'm gonna chew on those a little bit more.
Yeah, they are going to push you out there, but you know, I think what we've seen is they do have like phenomenal results, and like whether you actually are like totally bought into them or not, you have to admit it creates a different culture that is like a little bit less cutthroat, a little bit less competitive, and allows people to maybe be a little more creative in their work, or to be a little bit more thoughtful and less reactive.
It's interesting. And then question live actually on this point, resources for visualization or meditation in general.
Yeah, so you can use the meditation app. It doesn't have to be a goal visualization. I would just say it should be not totally like breath work focused. It has to have like a purpose around it or a target around it. So you can use apps to do it, whether it's Headspace or Calm. I think as part of the follow-up, we have a specific sales goal visualization that we can share, that we had put together and had someone record for us.
This has been an exciting journey. Maybe we recap the 7 steps and then we've got a little bit of time for questions here, folks. So yeah. I know everybody's just shaking some of the cobwebs loose from getting back in, but keep the questions coming. There's been a bunch of great ones so far.
Or like, this is totally crazy. So final thoughts, like mid-year is a great time to roll out changes. You have this like natural moment where you can say, okay, we've learned a lot so far this year. This is your new plan. Instead of waiting too long and then saying like, oh yeah, we're totally screwed. Like, here's a new plan. Like, hopefully you can do better. Don't be afraid to overpay, like especially in terms of like thinking about building habits. Like if you have to double comp people here and there, just do it. Remember your team wants to hit their targets. It's like what people are built to do. So as much as you want your team to hit their target, they want to hit their target even more. And then finally, don't forget the science of tying the quota to the behavior, to the commission, and repeating that so that you're actually seeing the behaviors that you're looking for. And a reminder of the 7 tips. Take this chance to reset your quotas now, both what you're measuring and the time period that you're measuring it over. Set multiple accelerator tiers. Try to switch to monthly quotas if you can. Focus on paying on the right habits. So that can mean paying on pipeline activity. And then turn off those really rich stop those really rich accelerators, and Rich's favorite of turning off the leaderboard and meditating more.
It's the art and the science of hitting quota here. We've got Sanj for a few more minutes. We had a bunch of great questions, folks, but we've got him for a few more minutes. Anything else, folks? Please do throw that in the Q&A panel.
Yeah, on the meditation point, I worked with a revenue leader who would often say, hope is not a strategy. Turns out meditation is.
Interesting. Hope is not a strategy. I've heard that before. Sanj, I actually have a question for you around monthly quotas, and you touched on this a little bit with building the right sales habits. Back to that, I'm back to the big deal cycle. Again, longer sales cycles. Would we say maybe we keep the quota of whatever it is, but there's incentives on the activities of the leading indicators, whether it's opportunity creation, pipeline generation, deal advancement, things like that,
Yeah.
that would be the precursors of the big whale getting closed when it closes?
Yeah, absolutely. So especially in long sales cycles, like paying on those habits or like the pipeline indicators is really, really important. But even for us, we have, somewhere between a 1 and 2 month sales cycle. We pay on the leading indicators, and it has like massively transformed like our win rate and our close rate.
It probably also forces, there's a meta benefit maybe for your sales leadership as well, where you can look at the precursors and say, hey, we're going to miss unless we change these things. I'm not looking at the end of the quarter trying to scramble to get deals done. It's like, no, if we don't do pipe gen now, a month from now, that's going to show up. 2 months from now, it's going to show up.
Right. And you also can figure out what are the kind of quick hit things that you can do to try to boost that number up. So, if we're falling short of our number in a given month of discovery calls that we want to have, we know that we can maybe reuse this one list that we have with a different sequence and like more customization. And that would be like the quick hit thing. We know like this type of profile can convert very quickly.
Interesting. It's funny, it sounds so complex, and it is, but when it starts to plug into other parts organizationally, you can start to get some really good insight on what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we talk about comp, and like when we talk about comp, we're actually talking about your sales process.
Yeah.
Like you have a complex sales process. You don't have a you might have a complicated comp plan, but if it matches your sales process, there's no problem.
Oh, I dig it. All right, folks. But we had a bunch of great questions coming in here. Sanj, every time that we have you on, it's always a wonderful experience. You get challenged, feel a little bit uncomfortable, have a great conversation. So thank you again for taking some time, especially after a long weekend. I really appreciate that. And on behalf of Hannah and the team behind the scenes, everybody in the community, those who attended here live today, and those who are watching in the future, want to thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you all.
Take care, Sanj. Stay safe. We'll see you soon.